Ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Elmhurst City Hall. This is Monday, March 23rd, 2009. The Elmhurst City Council is meeting this evening as a committee of the whole to continue our ongoing review of the 2009-2010 budget. This has been a process that's been going on for over a month now and will continue through this evening's process. I'd like the clerk to please call the roll to establish a quorum.
Regan.
Here.
Gutenkopf. Here. Leader.
Here.
Shea.
Here.
Graham.
Here.
Rose.
Here.
Gow.
Here.
Hipskin.
Here.
Moriarty.
Here.
Nybo. Absent. Sapaniak.
Here.
Morley.
Here.
Lumnicki.
Here.
Mulliner.
Here.
13 present, 1 absent.
13 present, 1 absent. Okay, very good. As I did 2 weeks ago on a similar evening, even though it was not a Elmhurst City Council night and so therefore not on our agenda, I'm going to in a moment ask you to all please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Let's recall that my reason at the time was that we have folks are out defending our country on an ongoing basis. This is critically important to show support for the men and women who defend our country, our way of life, and our Constitution. In the 2 weeks since we met, Illinois has lost three young people to enemy action overseas. And I just, out of respect for those 3 young men and everyone who has made that ultimate sacrifice, please all rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, very good. Mr. Borchard, as I announced, we're about the business of reviewing the budget. As you know, we have made, I think, some very good headway, particularly the first evening. Got through a lot of what I'll call the meatier issues, not that the things we have before us still are unimportant. They are not unimportant. But having said that, it would be my hope that we'll be able to conclude this portion of the process this evening. Mr. Borchard, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We left off on page 174, which is I think one of the last entries in the general fund, and then from there we'll move on to the other funds of the city. This last item on page 174 is transfer to the debt service to pay general obligation bonds for the bonds which were sold to finance the municipal garage project. The transfer comes from the general fund because the city council, back when that tax increment financing district was implemented, committed to the community that the economic return for the investment resulting in more sales tax being generated from the expanded shopping center at 83 in St. Charles. The council then committed that incremental growth of sales tax would be used as revenue to the general fund to pay the debt service, the principal and interest for that public works garage project. That's what this portion of the budget does. It's a transfer from the general fund to pay the debt service on that bond issue, which has about 8 more years before it will be paid off. And the incremental sales tax from the shopping center is paying the principal and interest necessary to make those payments.
Okay, very good. Any questions on this? Anyone? Because let me ask a question just so I understand this, Mr. Borchard. You wrapped it up by saying that in fact this transfer, I believe, out of the TIP fund into
out of the general fund.
Out of the general fund.
From sales tax revenue.
Sales tax. Okay, these numbers have been declining like all sales tax numbers have been recently, but you have the ability, or maybe you don't, Marilyn Gatson has the ability to actually identify the sales tax off of that. And are you doing that as a net number? Is that kind of like it's not a sales tax tip, but is it kind of like a sales tax? Is that all the sales tax or just the incremental sales tax?
Incremental.
Just the incremental, okay. And having said that, So the base sales tax is still going into the general fund and staying there.
Yeah, all of the sales tax from the shopping center goes in the general fund.
Right.
And just that portion that's necessary to pay the bond
Just the
issue
portion that's
comes out.
necessary. Okay, so the amount that we're paying on the bonds is declining, and that is not directly linked to the sales tax activity, but rather to the schedule of the bonds. And that's really where I was going on this.
Right.
To make sure that when I'm looking at these numbers declining over time.
Paying some principal and interest, and as we're
Right.
paying principal, then there's less,
And then in
less
2010,
interest.
2011, because of the bond schedule, the number picks up a little bit. Okay, very good. I just wanted to understand, because as that number was declining, I was fearing that we weren't covering the whole principal and issue, but you're telling me we are. Okay, then I'm satisfied, thank you. Okay, anyone else on this issue? All right, Mr. Borcher, next.
Pages 175 through 179 are the capital improvement fund. This is where the capital improvement fund finances expenditures of infrastructure. Capital improvement fund revenues come from the city's share of state income tax and a portion of one of the of sales tax.
All right, okay. That's on the revenue side. Any comments about the disbursement side, or this is just how it fills up? Okay, any questions about that?
We've covered the library, and we skipped therefore on to the motor fuel tax fund, pages 203 to 208. I think we've, again, just generally, the motor fuel tax is collected by the state of Illinois at the fuel pump, sent to Springfield, and then based on a population distributed back to cities and villages. That motor fuel tax collected by the state has gone down, resulting in less taxes to be distributed, and Elmhurst population, last population change went up less than the state generally. So again, Elmhurst is losing its proportional share of motor fuel tax. Motor fuel tax revenues generally help finance the Public Works Department's general maintenance areas. You've heard earlier, however, that the motor fuel tax fund is able to finance less staff, and therefore it puts more pressure on the general fund. Basically, all the motor fuel tax monies come in, they go over to help the general fund.
Okay, any questions there? Mr. Borcher, I don't want to belabor this point too long, but this dip here from 0809 to then from the budget to the actual estimates is shy $147,000. Now, is that because of the underperformance of the gasoline motor fuel tax in the state in general, or because we're between the census being taken? Now, I know that Elmhurst and other communities do special censuses, but I don't think that a special census, even in 20 smaller communities around the state, could add up to making a difference that would show up like this on our revenue stream. Do you have any comment that goes along with that? You mentioned the change in the population. What I'm saying is I agree with you. Change of the population is correct, but that's only the big number.
Way back. Yeah,
Alternative.
recently it's taxes collected annually by the state.
Okay, so it reflects the downturn in this tax being collected by the state. All right.
Yes.
All right, we'll let it go at that. But as you can see, this makes the point, and I'll make this for the press and anybody looking in on the TV. This is what we mean when we say virtually every revenue stream to the city of Elmhurst is under pressure. This is the motor fuel tax. This is something that has grown consistently over time. You can, in the old days, and by that I mean 18 months ago, you could just put it in the bank that this number generally rose over time, and now here it is declining. So pretty shocking when you think about it. And of course, this is a number that's in danger. When the legislature is in, they could change the formula. So when I'm asked what are the long-term dangers facing the city of Elmhurst, this is one of the major components. The motor fuel tax disbursement in the state of Illinois, income tax transfer, into the city from the state is another place where all good intentions, I mean, this is the way our system works, and it was all good intentions, but unfortunately, when the state gets under pressure, those folks have to balance their budget too, and they might come looking to take a little bit of a share away from us. And there's been proposals to do that in the past, so it's not like a fantasy thing we're talking about here. So, Mr. Borcher, any comments on that?
You're
Agreed?
correct.
Okay. Next, sir.
Municipal Utility Fund, pages 209 to 233. Now we're pleased to report the City Council is in charge again. We're in charge of the Utility Fund. I know the Finance Committee met earlier this evening relative to sewer rates and water rates. Those are the fundamental sources of revenue for the Utility Fund. There's a little interest income, a little other miscellaneous income. Basically, however, it's the fees paid by the users of the service in a fair fashion as determined by the City Council by your policy on how the rates are applied, provide the revenue. Mr. Hughes's Public Works Department and Mr. Stryker's water wastewater plant operation, and we'll get Dennis up here close so he can help answer any questions. They project out 3, 4, 5 years worth of capital and other significant operational areas of expenditures to allow the Finance Committee and the City Council to set a rate to finance those anticipated expenditures, and the Council with your oversight and the department heads with their operational control oversee the expenditures, which are highlighted on pages 209 through 233.
And you have Mr. Stryker here in case we have any questions.
The 219 is where the line-by-line expenditures begin to be relayed. Although this is utility fund and not the general fund that we have spent a lot of time on relative to the serious reductions in revenues, some of the same applications relative to labor and labor expenditure control have been applied across the board. Questions have come up before to all of the areas of the city labor force. So that's been applied to the labor portions of this utility fund budget. Other aspects of maintenance are unchanged from previous years. Same level of maintenance relative to water system and sewer collection system, and then lift station, pumps, motors, and wastewater treatment plant maintenance procedures are in play. I would say that from a control perspective, Mr. Stryker has successfully thus far actually eliminated the third shift at the wastewater treatment plant, and it's being operated from the telemetry and with supervisors in charge on an assigned basis, but without staff on that third shift on evenings that are routine. If there's a significant event being run through the wastewater treatment plant, meaning a lot of high flows, that plant will be staffed. Absent that, if it's a regular evening, the third shift is now being operated without staff on site, but with the sophisticated telemetry providing operational directions and controls.
Who is watching that sophisticated telemetry?
What the city manager is referring to is our SCADA system, which is we've been building and developing over the past number of years, and what we are doing now is making use of the staff on the third shift and putting them to better performance, better use, if you will, on the second shift, and on the first shift, beefing up the maintenance group with those folks. The SCADA system, if there's an alarm, I mean, anything from a door opening or a pump fail or something that's should be working that isn't working, we'll call the operator who's on call on a cell phone, and that person's carrying a laptop home. They can log into the system via the laptop and correct what's wrong, or if not, be available to come in immediately and take care of what's wrong. So we give folks a more normal work schedule, you know, daytime, afternoon hours rather than the overnight time, and make use of those extra folks in the daytime. Been working very well.
Okay. Any questions? Mr. Sponiak?
Thank you, Mayor. On page 221, under contractual services, the DWC DuPage Water Commission consumption, Marilyn, is that the 15% that we were just talking about, the increase in water? Can you comment on that?
Yes, on that line 3020, DuPage Water Commission consumption, that number has stayed very consistent over time. However, January 1st, 2008, City of Chicago passed through to DuPage Water Commission a 15% increase on Lake Michigan water. January 1st, 2009, another 15%. January 1st, 2010 will be another 15%. So that line for consumption, the rate will increase. Now, whether it's a wet summer, a dry summer, will depend on the usage, will impact the usage, but the rates will increase because of Chicago passing through the rates to DuPage Water Commission.
And that's the rate that's being passed on to all the communities, all the DuPage Water communities?
All Dennis Director, all charter communities to that, so all the beginning communities. And we've
Okay.
been receiving water since 1991 through DuPage Water.
Well, that's a correct answer, but let me go one step farther. The water rate increase that Chicago, now, we don't pay what they pay for water in the city of Chicago, because we have a roughly 18-mile pipe with at least 2 major pumping and reservoir stations in between. That pipe and those 2 stations cost, in round numbers, 15 years ago, $120 million to build, something of that nature, a lot of money. So we're paying off those bonds and paying for it. So we don't pay what they pay in the city of Chicago. However, in the original contract to purchase water from the city of Chicago, they cannot raise our rates unless they raise the rates upon themselves as well, percentage. So if our rates are going up 15% a year, the rates in the city of Chicago are going up 15% a year. Right? So we're buying bulk water, we're processing it, then the city of Elmhurst buys it, and we also process it, and then we sell it to the consumer. So there's a couple of different hands in there in between, but there's actual complex, sophisticated, expensive, and very important infrastructure between that intake 3.5 miles out in the lake and your tap water in your home. And so there's expenses there. But having said that, I need to hasten to your question, which was a good question, to add to Marilyn's answer, is that these increases that we're paying are not in any way punitive to us from the city of Chicago, nor are they funding their system on our back. We can only get an increase from the city of Chicago equal to increases that they place on their own customers inside the city limits. That was a protection written into that, and I'll also hasten to add, before I came along, somebody smarter than me, before me, figured this out and protected us in that way. So, okay, I saw a couple other hands over here. Alderman Sapaniak's done. Alderman Lubnicki had her hand up, and then Alderman Bram.
Alderman Lubnicki.
Alderman Lubnicki?
I answered my own question, just reading something that I didn't catch.
Okay, very good. Alderman
So
Bram.
it was
That
my own
happens.
fault for not reading ahead, but I did.
I'm not going to fault you for not having read this entire, every line item in this document. I've never done it ever. I'm good when I get the big numbers.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Bram, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you. On page 221, line item 3057, rehabilitating wells, is that the city's backup wells? Is that what that rehabilitation is?
It's one well, just in case.
Yeah, are we down to one well, just in case? But we had, I was going to say, we have more. But one of them's being rehabbed in this budget.
Well, it provides for the opportunity to rehab it, but we hope we don't have to.
Okay.
Okay. All right. But Mr. Bram, I hope you saw Mr. Stryker hold up 3 fingers. We have 3 backup wells. Should the city of Chicago be unable to deliver water, and there's all kinds of reasons how that could happen, although we do have multiple inlets into the Lexington pumping station, and we do have 2 complete pipes from Lexington to the facility in southeast Elmhurst, and then we have looping systems around. But still, the best laid plans go wrong, so we maintain 3 pumping stations on our own so that we can go to the aquifer should we need to.
Right.
And they run those on a periodic basis to make sure that they're working and to test the water that comes out of them.
Yeah, we have three wells, 2 deep, 1 shallow well. I think altogether they'd provide us about 4.6 million gallons a day if we needed it. And we do test them every month, as the mayor said. And in fact, we just stress test one this past week, well 4 at St. Charles and Route 83, and it passed with flying colors. So we're going to do that with the other well, well 6. As the city manager said, $300,000 is 1 year out. It's intended to be there in the event that there's a failure on one of these pre-planned tests. We can look forward to pulling the well and finding out what's wrong with it and then deciding what we're going to do.
Thank you. Just one other question on page 224. And I do know you have a detailed explanation on the other page, but it's in regards to the increase from 250 to 350 on the water meters, increasing the RF meters that are being installed. Do you have just a rough estimate on how many meters have been transitioned over? Because I think that ultimately this actually helps out the staff, reduces staff going out and reading meters, which saves us money.
Yeah, exactly. This is changing out the meter heads so that they can be radio read. Excuse me. Our van drives down the street and just picks them up as we go. The increase next year is the contractual commitment to have all of Yorkfield water services changed over within the year. And then what's happened is we have 3, we read 8 cycles. We have 3 completely switched over to radio read now. So as we get certain cycles, as we get more cycles switched over, we don't spend as much time reading, and therefore we have more time to put the radio heads in. So we think by the time we get 2 years out, we'll be able to do more. And you're right, eventually they'll all be radio read, and our meter reading will come to a very small number.
Do you know on approximately how far along in the city are we? Are we 10%, 20%?
We're 3 of 8. 3 of 8 are completely changed over. There's 8 cycles, and 3 of them are changed over. So we're almost half, and it should accelerate as we get further.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? Alderman Gunkov?
Thank you. Did you say that this increase is for Yorkfield, and the number of residences in Yorkfield has been decreasing in recent years? How many houses are we looking at doing, and when did you come up with that figure?
Well, I believe there's 380 homes in Yorkfield.
Still?
Yes, and this is, we bought the system from Oak Brook, so it's the unincorporated south of Butterfield Road. They had a different meter reading system, so our guns don't work on theirs. Fortunately, they have the same meters, and this head does work, but we'd have to either swap it out to one we could go read with the gun, or we can just swap it out and put in our radio read. So we sort of jumped them up and are just doing a one-time changeover so that we can read their meters. For the contract, that was a 1 year. We were supposed to have that done.
Well, I just drove through Yorkfield the other day, and it seems to me that the hospital's buying up an awful lot of property and taking the houses out, so.
Yeah, this is mostly east of York.
Mostly east of York, thank you.
Yeah, this is 380 homes, of which they've bought, I don't know what the hospital's taken out, and, sorry? Well, but over the last many years, going forward from now, at this point, they're talking about 10. You know, something, and that's a guess, so don't quote me. I mean, I'm just looking at the map like everybody else, and that's only if the folks, I mean, they don't condemn, they don't push anybody out. If it works, it works. It doesn't, it doesn't. There was another question, Alderman?
You know, I had another question. On item 8012, the water mains, on page 224, what areas are you going to be currently working on for the, I know that there's been a lot of residents' interest as to with all the increased water, and would like to know what type of areas that would cover.
I apologize, I don't have this year's list in front of me.
Okay.
It basically is done on trying to get rid of 4-inch main, where we have in a lot of main breaks, and those are sort of our two main criteria. We do about 3,000 feet of water main a year, so this one here, we budget $770,000 of that is for new water main, replacement water main. $95,000 goes to the water service upgrades. When someone fixes their side of the water service, we come and fix our side. And then there's about $275,000 in there for the Prospect Avenue water main for the eventually annexed area of Prospect.
And that 275 will be paid off by the property owners through a special service area. They're taxing themselves. They'll pay the city back over 20 years. The city needs to pay the contractor after the contractor does the project, but the property owners have special tax themselves, and they'll pay the city back over a 20-year time frame.
Okay. Anyone else in the water department? I have just a brief little question. As you're switching to these radio readers, you have to go in the house to do that, or are you changing the equipment on the outside of the house?
Yeah, we have to go in the house to do that. The equipment on the outside stays the same, but we don't really need it because we get it as we drive down the street.
So you do that, need to gain entry. Any issues with that?
No.
It's not a budget issue, but
It's been fine.
it's been fine. Okay. All right, very good. Well, thank you very much. Some good questions. Thank you. Yeah, sure.
You know, you just made me think of something. If you're going to go into houses, and this came up during our finance committee meeting, Dennis mentioned that he thought there might be significant, or at least some, illegal water hookups or storm sewer hookups with the sump pumps going back into the storm sewers. Is there any way to verify whether or not, you know, all the hookups are legal at this point?
Right. When we're doing the water meters, we're not particularly looking for that. The way we kind of police that is, in order to get a transfer tax stamp, you have to have a sump pump inspection. So that number is obviously down now, but we've been doing that since the program's inception. So, and we probably see, you know, just without having actually kept numbers, we think we're around 5% that we see hooked back in. So if we were seeing higher numbers, we'd probably be more proactive, but it doesn't seem like it's all that flagrant. But that's the program that exists to police that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, we wouldn't want to get held out of 5% of the homes because we were double dipping the inspections. The reason why I asked the question was, my recollection, having lived in Elmhurst long before I was an elected official, was that before I arrived here, there were some issues with this very subject about people, about gaining access to homes for that first inspection, that storm, and there were people who were quoting the Constitution of the United States of America to our public works people, and, you know, fair enough, but all they wanted to do was come in and take a look at the pipes, make sure they were hooked up legally. This is a very big issue. When we get extra inputs into the stormwater that causes these kinds of localized flooding issues that occur on only a block or in a neighborhood or only a home on a street, that's too much stormwater somehow getting into the wastewater treatment pipe. If stormwater, if you can imagine a perfect world when absolutely no stormwater got into the sanitary sewer pipes, then you never, ever have a sanitary sewer backup, would you? Why would it happen? There'd be no extra water in there to back up. The system works fine every day. It's only when the water gets in there, and how does it get in there? It gets in there because of cracked pipes, because of tree roots, because of old piping, which we are diligently going about the business of fixing. This in situ form, thank you, system is working right. I heard someone say in a discussion in a meeting 4 to 6 weeks ago that one portion of town, one neighborhood had been pretty much completed, and that you could actually...
Everything north of the 290 and east of York has been completed.
It's all been redone with these forms.
All been lined, right.
And so you can actually see the improvement in less excess flows during rain events coming out of that neighborhood because of the system has been deployed. So you know, this is important stuff. We're not going into homes to look at things because we have time on our hands. This is an important thing, to get those sump pumps disconnected from the sanitary sewer system. That's partially you're draining water out of your yard where maybe you could really sit till tomorrow morning and pumping it into that system and overcharging that sanitary system, and somewhere down the line some neighbor is getting a sewer back up in their basement. We've got to do everything we can reasonably do to stop that from happening. So, okay, very good. Thank you very much, guys. Appreciate your time. Mr. Borchard?
We move to the parking system fund, pages 234 to 242. Just a couple of highlights. There are some improvements of additional parking along the Union Pacific Railroad tracks that Mr. Hughes and the Public Works Engineering Group were able to find ways, with the help of the Union Pacific Railroad, to shoehorn in a little more parking along that railroad right-of-way in a few locations. That is provided for. And the big project is the construction of a parking deck frankly, yet to be designed on the property that the city purchased today. The closing today took place for the Hurley site on First Avenue. So the city now owns that First Avenue site, on which the city will be working on a design with the next Public Works Committee and the next City Council approving that design and then approving that construction. After that construction is concluded, it would be the city staff's recommendation that with that new improvement and that new service, that the city's parking fees would go up from $1.50 to $2. That results in the increase in revenue in the second year out of the budget of the parking system fund. The details are on pages 234 through 242.
Questions?
The city also is seeking stimulus grant dollars and Metra grant dollars from the federal government and from Metra as a result of the sustainability issues associated with mass transit. Yet, so far, there has been no early approvals on any of that, but the city continues to seek that leveraging of local dollars with wherever matching grant dollars could be found.
You know, the automatic payment system, I know we've discussed about this previously, where you can start paying from either a debit card or a credit card, and to have all of the parking automatic so that the residents aren't searching for certain dollar amounts. Where are we in the status of that technology coming on board?
The RFP for purchase of those machines just was issued last week. So we'll be getting those back, analyzing those responses, and it will go through the Finance Committee. You'll see that budget on page 241, line 8098, miscellaneous equipment, 85,000. It's in that number, those automated coin boxes, I'll call them.
If the RFP was just issued, do you still expect to expend these funds in the fiscal year that we're in right at the moment?
No, originally at the time we put this budget together, we had high hopes, and that didn't happen. This will be carried over. This will be a carryover that you will see that will be then in next year's budget.
Be one of those rollovers. Okay. Anyone else? Marilyn, I don't, not so much on the budget issue, but on the technology issue, if I may. These machines will not only take cash, they'll take credit cards? Okay.
At least debit cards, it's going to depend on the pricing. So we have to wait till we get the RFPs back. Our RFP included that as an option, but certainly debit cards.
Okay. I could share this with you at greater length later on, but ask me later on when we're not got everybody busy here about the Tap-It system in LA. When I was out there, I was looking at higher tech public transportation systems, and they have what they're calling Tap-It which is a universal, across-the-board, 47 different transportation systems, some of which include parking access, and it's this thing where you have a credit card that you can swipe in proximity to a reader. You tap it on the reader, kind of like the fob thing that you were seeing at gas stations 2 or 3 years ago. For reasons that I don't understand, that technology has dead-ended and being replaced by the component of the active component of that fob is going into the body of credit cards now. So it's what they call it, tap it, and you can show up at a bus rapid transit, a parking lot, heavy rail, virtually anything in LA, and if you have a tap it, a card that works with the tap it system, which you have to go to the right bank to get that, or it's issued by their like their RTA, then it's red, and it's red across the board. And this is something that State Representative Julie Hamels has been pushing through the state legislature on the RTA and PACE and METRA and CTA, and she's absolutely right about this, which is universal fare servicing, so that people don't have to buy a card for the CTA and a card for PACE, and it's an impediment to using public transportation. We're trying to break down the impediments to using public transportation. And if that tap-it card, just imagine, think forward now 3-4 years, that tap-it card works to park at the train and then works on the train, and then it works on the CTA bus in the city at the other end of the train, or on the water taxi on the river to get you around to the north, et cetera. That's where this is going. So you might want to just talk to them about this. And if you want some more information, I got people at the RTA who can get it for you. Thank you. Mr. Regan.
On a related issue, if you're interested in this, on today's Chicago Tribune, there is a lengthy article about METRA and whether it is or isn't in the 21st century, but they go into a great conversation about this, this technology or lack thereof.
Right. Well, it's heavy rail system. You know, the original system was designed in the neighborhood of 100 years ago, as we all know, by a fellow from Britain, which is why the trains run on the wrong side. You ever notice that? Our trains run on the inbound train is on the left side, and the outbound, that's because he was a guy from London. And that's who the Northwest Railroad hired. And so we have kind of a backwards train system here, literally. But anyway. And guess what? Hundreds of millions of dollars to straighten that little thing out, so they left it. Okay, we digress. We have business here. Sorry. Where are we at, Mr. Borchert?
If we're moving from parking system fund, then we're to really the last budget where the city has some real control. That would be the TIF funds, pages 243 through 282. This microphone, I think, is a little easier. In the TIF for next fiscal year, it's a more simple year relative to infrastructure. Fundamentally, it finishes last year's aggressive streetscaping, which includes the west side of York Street from 2nd to a little north of 3rd. But in a big fashion, big projects, the two plazas, the police station plaza and the Schiller York City Center Plaza, with a serious replacement of the focal point, the fountain, contracted for. Then in addition, a improvement to the plaza entering the cultural campus area that's on the west side of Cottage Hill and north of the entrance to the Cottage Hill entrance to the library. That plaza presently being, from a conceptual design, being offered by the Elmhurst Park District Landscape Architectural Group. They're offering a concept design, eventually to be then forwarded to the next Public Works Committee and the City Council for consideration. And the last item of infrastructure is the Schiller Court alleyway streetscaping from York Street west to the north-south alley to complement the private side investment on the south facade of the building that is being renovated by Mr. Johnson. That's the highlights in the TIF fund for next fiscal year.
Okay, questions? Alderman Moriarty?
I just have a quick, on line item 461-8004, the property acquisition for the 2.1 million. Oh, it's on page 249.
Yes, that line item for the 2009 year, that was the purchase of 190 West Park, that parking lot. And the 2.1 million is the purchase of the gas station on North York, yet to be acquired.
I'm sorry, which
So
gas
that's why
station?
The gas,
Olives. Oh,
Polly's, yeah.
190 West Park, okay, right, okay,
So
by the
it's-
library. Okay,
Oh, okay, and the gas station is part of the Han Street?
right.
Okay.
Right? Anyone else? Okay, Mr. Borchard?
Mr. Mayor,
What, oh, I'm sorry.
thank you. My question's on page 278 in the stormwater section.
278?
It's a budget increase for stormwater improvements along Salt Creek. My question is, is this going to include cleanup of the city-owned property at the end of Thomas and Monterey? It got pretty badly damaged in the recent flooding, and with the new greenway that comes through that whole section along Salt Creek west of Route 83, I wonder if that's covered by this budget as well.
It could be, it's not yet. This is basically a concept of a capital project. The details are yet to be identified, but the area you described would be what is contemplated for when such a project should go forward. Specifically, I believe this is the line that will finance, should the council proceed with what has been at least conceptually designed as improvements to the 5 stormwater lift stations along Salt Creek and in alignment with the Salt Creek Bike Trail. There are some improvements at those lift stations that would allow for some best management practices on stormwater management, provide an education opportunity for the community as they do the Salt Creek Bike Trail, also inform and educate the community about the stormwater aspects of Elmhurst storm system. A small part of this budget will go for those lift station improvements. The rest of the improvements along Salt Creek, we frankly need to work with the council, the next Public Works Committee, and identify the timing for such an improvement. And we would be interested in the concerns and issues along Salt Creek north of St. Charles Road, which would be part of it.
Okay. Anyone else? Mr. Spinanek?
Thank you, Mayor. You know, since we're talking about the TIFs, is there anything imminent with the Olteen property? Because it's related to the garage, which is TIF, and, you know, I know that's an issue.
We have contacted the Olteen family relative to the Elmhurst interests. The city has been successful in working with the owners, and the owners have paid for the demolition of the garage and the home completely. All of that has been leveled, so the attractive nuisance, if you will, for the neighborhood is gone. So they're in code compliance perspective. The property is sitting empty and unused. The city is attempting to negotiate. We have not had active negotiations coming back. So to answer your question, it's a planned expenditure when the time is right.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Borchard, refresh my memory, and I should know this, and I apologize I don't. The zoning on the Olteen property at this point, is it still the multifamily, or did we change it to CR?
It's multifamily.
Okay, well, that's a, you know, we need to, we made a promise to that neighborhood, and that we need that property for 2 reasons. Between the Olteen property and the Davis property, they combine to provide 2 functions: a larger footprint for the Public Works garage, which we would have really liked to have put the Public Works garage at the extreme south end of the property, within 10 feet of the property line, the resulting property line, because then all the activity would have been north of it. But we couldn't get the Olteen property. So now, eventually, Mr. Hughes is going to be storing his, as we were talking about the other day, his stone piles, his aggregate piles of different graded stones along that south side there, and we're going to have to do some considerable landscaping to screen that from the neighborhood to the south, which is why we acquired the Davis property. Okay, so the Davis property is already done. But my point is now, as this lingers on, you have a piece of property out there that we haven't acquired that is zoned multifamily. Now, I don't know anyone who would like to see an apartment building wedged into the middle of that single-family home neighborhood over there, particularly the school system, who would have to absorb the kids out of that building, et cetera. So this is something I just want to focus on this for a minute and kind of highlight it for everybody who is going to be here later on, after I'm not, that this is something that needs our attention to close out this situation, and Mr. Borchard and city staff are going to need your support when the time comes to get this done. It's really, there was a promise to Mrs. Olteen. She was at that microphone. I think it was before the days we were videotaping, so we don't have a videotape of it. But the deal worked out between her and the city council at the time was, we promise we will not condemn you and push you out of your home, but you understand or promise, I forget exactly how it was left, that when you no longer need that home, you will sell it to the city at a reasonable, fairly arrived at cost. Well, she's out of the home now, so I would ask you to take every opportunity to move that ball forward. All right, very good. Mr. Borchard?
Items X and Y, debt service funds, pages 283 to 290, and then trust and agency funds, 291 to 305, are required entries in a budget to allow for previously approved by council actions, payments to be made for bond issues and other such more administrative requirements. Would yield to Ms. Gaston if there's questions.
Alderman Gukoff.
Yeah. Thank you. On page 300, the Gloss Mausoleum Fund, the interest income's dropping dramatically, and I wonder how much maintenance this $400 can actually, our interest income on this fund is dropping, and is it really useful, or are we picking up maintenance of the Gloss Mausoleum through other budget lines somehow?
Yeah, Alderman Gukoff, I asked page number?
300.
300.
I apologize, I didn't quite understand the question.
The Gloss, there's a fund for maintaining the Gloss Mausoleum that
Yes.
is based on donations we received a long time ago, and
Right.
it looks like it's dropping dramatically given the state of interest income these
yes.
days. And I'm wondering how we're maintaining the mausoleum, since this is clearly not going to cover it, and what else, where the money comes from.
Well, the money would come from, the balance in that fund is this $32,000. So from time to time, as Public Works would indicate, I think it's been maybe sometime in the last 5 years, we spent maybe $2,000 to $3,000. We did lighting, we did a number of things, and a full cleaning of the mausoleum. And now there really isn't much to do. The grounds are managed by the city or the Park District. So right now, there isn't anything, but should there be, then we would budget the $5,000 or whatever was needed, and we would take it out of that balance, the $32,000 balance. We put in, you're right, we put in $500 for maintenance of the building and grounds. That's just something small breaks, we can fix it. It's not meant to be a major cleaning or rehaul of the monument.
Well, the reason for my concern is that as the potential for this fund to, generate any interest income drops, then we're clearly dipping into the principal, which makes it difficult to protect it long-term.
Right, but let's hope that this economy turns around and there'll be something more than 0.5% interest the city will be able to invest in.
Mr. Borcher, you did a major rehab on the facility a number of years ago. Do you recall what those numbers were? Just to put this balance in context? Maybe Mr. Hughes can help you out? Do you happen to recall? I don't know how many years ago it was. It wasn't all that long ago.
It was probably 10 years ago.
That long ago now?
Yeah.
Wow.
And between Mr. Morley and myself, we can't get that number. It's lost, and we could get it for you if you'd like, but we can't recall.
Well, I was just wondering, I mean, if that, you know, to Alderman Gutenkauf's point, if this is $32,000 balance and we're making, you know, several $100s a year, and every 10 years we have to put $100,000 into it, at some point, this isn't gonna sustain itself anymore. Now, I think I just saw Mr. Morley say it's a lot less than that, but here's my point. At the end of the day, someday, the time is gonna come when this fund just isn't gonna support this activity anymore. I think that was foreordained when the city accepted the property, the facility, and the funds in the original, I'll call it endowment. I don't know if that was the original term. But someday, sooner or later, it's going to fall on the city to keep this piece up. I would hazard a guess, a prediction. One was always folly in making predictions, but whenever that day comes, that the city will step up and do what needs to be done to preserve that facility. It's an absolutely unique structure. I think it's one of the most iconic structures in DuPage County. I wish you could see it. I talk to the Park District about it all the time, about the fact that they maintain the grounds, and they planted a bunch of trees, according to the landscape theory that they had, which was fine, but the trees grew up, and now you can't see the thing anymore. So I wish that they could find a way to landscape it, make it pleasant, make it a nice place to walk and sit. And if you've ever been over there, there's a bench there. It's a nice place to sit. It's kind of quiet. The underpass is right there, but that notwithstanding, the tracks are there. But how can I say it's quiet? It's occasionally quiet. It's a nice spot, and it's a unique spot. And it's kind of like our own, and I've said this before from open microphones, and people thought I was a little silly, but it's almost like our own little Washington Monument or Lincoln Memorial. In this case, there's actually the founder of our community, the father of our community, is buried on that site in a very, very attractive building that he commissioned and then gave to the city. So I think sooner or later, Elmhurst is gonna have to accept the responsibility for the long-term maintenance of that facility. But those days aren't here yet, but they're out there somewhere. So, okay, Mr. Borcher.
I glossed over the trust and agency funds too quickly. I should mention, we don't typically spend time on the working cash fund, but the working cash fund is a critical part of the manager's suggested budget for the council this year and does contemplate in what's been characterized as the rainy day to use this rainy day fund in 09-10 to the tune of $700,000 to allow for the expenditures to be covered with revenues and with the transferred monies from the working cash fund, and would suggest that I'll be working with the next city council, probably not next fiscal year, but hopefully the next fiscal year after that, towards identifying a way to pay back the working cash fund for a future city council's use in a future way out rainy day period. Shown on page 303.
Right. Okay, good point. It buys us another year for the economy to turn around and this recession to
And it does
itself.
again contemplate that the fund balance next fiscal year will have a slight contribution if all of the estimates become reality. Some will be over, some will be under, but if in general the expenditures and revenues are as anticipated, there'll be a slight contribution to fund balance, resulting in a fund balance of $6 to $7 million. So there's still a lot of money in the bank.
I understand. This is one of the places where the council, and you've heard me say this before, maybe at the State of the City address or some other venue, where I give credit to previous councils for diligently attempting to squirrel money away for a rainy day. And it's a hard thing to do in government, because you can always take credit for not raising a tax or lowering a tax, but you by not building up these funds, but you leave yourself open to a sudden downturn. And if you look at this, the balance here, we use this fund for exactly what it was intended to do, which was to buy us, the city council, and Mr. Borchard, and the city management team some time to weather a storm. Now, it's been raining a long, long time, and that's all I know. I'm not going to predict how long it's going to go on, because I just frankly don't know. But I think it did its job, and I think we need to recognize that it did its job. And I would hope that however many of you are still around 5 or 6 years from now, that you will be open to suggestion that when times improve, we try to build this balance up as best we can. So, all right, Alderman Shea?
Yeah, can I just ask a question about the capital expenditures? I know we covered that, but I came across something over the weekend, and I want to ask a question. For the, in February, we approved the York Street at Brush Hill intersection for the Phase 1 engineering. Okay, and that was for $147,000. Now, that is supposed to come out of the hospital infrastructure cap of $2.8 million, correct?
Infrastructure is financed 50% city, 50% hospital.
Right.
We'd need to check if there's a cap. There's a cap.
Yeah, was this coming out of that fund?
I think
I guess, is
the
it part
city
of
is sponsoring the engineering and for York and Roosevelt.
I don't think there was a fund set aside. I think there was a process and an agreement as to what would happen, but the funds were not previously set aside.
Right, they're in the city's capital improvement fund. V3 Engineering, working for the hospital, did a lot of the work for that intersection, but it was identified that the city consultant would be the best consultant to go through the grantmanship necessary to work with IDOT and the federal transportation dollars, and the next phase of engineering was approved by the committee and the council here for that work to begin. That is part of the city budget, but the hospital will be paying for half of that as it goes forward.
Right. So the only reason I was asking is because, I thought Mr. Hughes expressed that the money would total the $2.8 million. Okay, and he said, I thought he said the Phase 1 engineering is part of it. And the reason I was wondering, because I was filing things away, and it says this is being taken out of the budget from last year's for the engineering Phase 1. So then I didn't know if we needed to subtract that from the 2.8, which is supposed to be our cap for, for this next budget.
We'll need to maybe do some arithmetic with your suggestions, but the city will only pay half the cost of the capital work. Most of the capital work is being financed, frankly, by the hospital, and the city will be reimbursing the hospital. This is the first assignment that the city has taken on for engineering, so there will need to be an accounting which the hospital team understands, and they work with the city finance department to go through that. But as the bills become paid, most of the time it's the hospital paying the bill, and eventually the city gets a request to pay our fair share, and I don't think we've paid much yet.
The actual budget for that on page 156. in the public benefits portion on line 8025. We don't have 2.8 million budgeted all in 1 year. We're spreading it over 3 years, of which you only see 2 here.
Page
So
again,
that's-
Marilyn? 186?
156, page 156.
Thank you.
This is the public benefits budget, line item 8025, street improvements.
Okay.
The next 2 years, you see the big numbers there, million. If we had a third year, you'd see another million, or whatever that number is, another 800,000 to get to the 2.8, which would be our share. But as city manager said, we're not paying out anything until they've spent the money. Then we're doing a reimbursement. They're going to invoice us. Some things, like this other project, we may be doing ourselves, but most of it they're doing, and then we'll be paying our fair share.
All right,
Does that make sense?
yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, just help, did you have a question on this, Alderman Wall? Just help me to understand this, make sure, trying to track with the question. There was not a fund established and the money put aside. There was an agreement and a methodology as to how we would apportion these expenses going forward, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so there's not a fund.
No.
All right, so then, to restate Alderman Shea's question, this work, including the design work, would be part of that agreement? Yes, okay. So it would be, and it would apply to the cap.
Yeah.
All right? Okay, very good. Mr. Borchert, what's next?
Any final questions on the budget generally?
Questions, comments, we're down at the bottom of the page.
What staff does next is, and this year is a bit unique in that there's a fifth Monday, next Monday's a fifth Monday. We could use it for further budget study, or if we're done, we're done. The budget ordinance then becomes an ordinance. There's typically a memo provided for the council which identifies all of, as an example, Alderman Gutenkopf's question about the parking investment that was budgeted in this fiscal year. It will get started to some degree this year, but it be basically paid for next year. Those dollars budgeted for this year will need to be reappropriated into next year's budget. Those reappropriation items will be listed in a memo for you attached to the budget ordinance. The budget ordinance will be on the council's agenda for the first Monday meeting in April.
Okay, very good. Alderman Moriarty?
No, if I'd like to make a motion maybe for us to consider and to discuss part of this budget to put into the budget the tree planting, the block party stipulation, as well as the backyard rear drain program, and maybe look at, in lieu of, I know how the budget's a big, you take it out of one part, maybe look at maybe deferring a little bit more of the expense that we have budgeted for the Elmhurst Historical Museum to balance it out. And I'd like to have us look at it as a council, as an idea tonight.
Well, the chair should help you out here. You had 3 recommended increases to line items and 1 decrease.
Correct.
I think you need to parse that. I think that Robert's Rules of Order is like you to take things in discernible chunks. So I think you need to do those one at a time, those 4 things.
Okay. To make 4 different motions?
Yeah.
Okay. Then I'd like to make a motion that we revisit the backyard rear drain program.
No, wait a minute. Let me help you out here.
Okay, sorry.
You don't want to make a motion to revisit.
Oh, no, I want to make a motion to add it back into the budget.
Yes, and if
Thank
you have if you don't, do you know the dollar amount that you're looking at?
No, I do not know.
Okay,
the
maybe the
exact
staff could, do we know what that was?
If to help in the council discussion, the block party issue was suggested to keep the budget balanced, as the council had asked the budget to be balanced. The city identified a permit fee for a street closure. It's estimated that the street closure permit fee would raise $25,000. I think the tree budget was $150,000, and the rear yard drain program is maybe 50,000. $150. And, I mean, the council needs to make its deliberations, its determination. I would, without an ability to respond to what happens with what's cut from the budget, would perhaps suggest that if you wish to use more of the fund balance than you authorize the manager to use in preparing the budget, certainly the city council could use fund balance if you wished. On the tree planting, frankly, at this point in the calendar year, I think we would be able to do some fall tree planting, maybe not a full year's worth of planting in the fall. We could do a little bit at the tail end of the spring, but by the time the next committee, from a practical perspective, a Public Works Committee would need to review bids, award, make a recommendation, council approve those bids. By the time that happened, we're going to be into the summer when it's not a good time to be planting trees.
Orchard, the city council will, as always, look to you for advice and knowledge and facts as we make our decisions, but you're putting facts before us on issues that haven't even been moved yet. So I think what I was trying to do was to counsel or help Alderman Moriarty as to how the correct form of her motion should be a move to reinstate X number of dollars, which will look to you for the number, to the budget for, let's just
Be the
start with the tree planting was the one you wanted to start with.
the tree planting, the rear yard drain
Yeah,
program.
but I'm trying to do this one at a time.
Okay, we can do
Okay,
it.
so, let me ask you this. Were you talking about restoring 100% of the dollars to last year's budget number by way of example?
Correct.
Okay, so then that's $150,000.
Correct.
Okay. So you need to move that.
Do I move to make a motion to reinstate the Parkway tree planting program?
Okay. All right, do we have a second? Alderman Lomnicki seconds. Discussion.
I think in lieu,
Go ahead.
okay. I think it's important at this state of the game that we do reinstate the trees. We are the we're the tree city of Elmhurst. The trees provide many more benefits for the future. It improves our oxygen, it absorbs our water, it improves our, the state of the parkways. I think it's one of Elmhurst's greatest attributes that we have. And I also believe that with the elm tree, or the ash tree disease coming through in the next year or so, we're going to be losing 4,000 ash trees, that we should be proactive in going forward with our current tree planting program.
Okay. Anyone else? Alderman Lomnicki.
Thank you. I did move to support that. However, I would be comfortable also with the current status of where we're already in March of '09, even be comfortable more or less with even half of the planting to take place on a budget issue. There's a lot of people who have had their trees cut down on the parkway who were promised trees this spring, and now they're left with stumps on their parkway. Again, I'd be comfortable with even half of that budget coming through if we could not find the dollars for all of it. To elaborate a little bit more on what Alderman Moriarty is trying to consider doing, well, I don't know if I want to stick to the subject or not, but I have something else about the historical budget that I'd like to bring up, but that's in lieu of trying to find funds to balance this all out.
I think that adding where you're going to come up with the money is a proper thing to put into the discussion.
Part of my reasoning is, since I got on Public Works, which was 4 years ago, we've been talking about this one-room schoolhouse, and we've been investing a lot of money in the one-room schoolhouse, and I do want to see it finished. I don't know at this point in time if fiscally we can be responsible. I know we put a bid out to, and we've promised to do the parking lot, which I think we proposed would be $60,000, but that's part of a contractual thing we have to finish. I'm in favor of that. However, the other $380,000 that would be left over, I think some of that money should come out of there to better some other issues that I think a lot of the residents in this town are not happy with, part of it being some of the points that Alderman Moriarty made. I know that we discussed about a grant that was going to be given, which really, I'd be afraid to back this off if we don't get this grant. You know, if we just say, let's hold off for a year or two on finishing this one-room schoolhouse, which has been a labor of love for a lot of people, I'm sure. But I think in this economic climate that we're in, you almost have to pick and choose. I put it very basic is, I want a brand new kitchen, but I can only afford the dishwasher. I mean, at this point in time, I think we need to be very careful on what we want to finish that we've started, but then what things we are cutting off in lieu of some things that could maybe hold off another year or even 2 years down the road. And that's where I think some of the funding can help balance some of the things that Alderman Moriarty is considering putting back into the budget.
Okay, Chair would also advise you that if you want to cut the number down, you need to do that with a motion. There is a number in her motion right now. Anybody can move to change that up or down from where it's currently at.
No, I'll make the motion.
Chair
I'll make the motion
recognizes Alderman
to,
Lewandowski.
I motion to cut the tree planting budget from $150,000 to $75,000 in hopes to allow some more money to be left for other things. So I'm motion it for $75,000 versus the $150,000.
Okay, that needs a second. That's a
I'll second that.
Okay, well, you guys can do it unilaterally. But if you're, I didn't know that was going to happen. You're the maker of the motion, and she's the seconder. If you say that and she agrees, then it's done.
Okay.
Okay, so that's done. So, all right, there's a motion before us to reestablish in the tree planting budget number up to $75,000, which is half of what it was a year ago. Okay. If I may, well, let's get Mr. Gowan, and I have a question to ask Mr. Borcher, but I want to go to Mr. Gowan. Sir.
Well, in light of what we've heard from staff in any event, in terms of the viability of let's say, using that whole budget, given the fact that we're already into spring, even though it doesn't often look that way, but from the standpoint of planning, if their analysis is correct, then it would not seem appropriate to plant in a season when, in other words, a long-winded way of saying, I think if we cut it in half and use that for the fall, or, you know, at a time where it's appropriate. Okay,
Mr. Grau, I'm going to ask a point of information of you, sir. I wasn't in your committee. I didn't hear what the staff said about the timing. What did the staff say?
No, I'm reflecting on what was said, reiterated a brief time ago. That is to say that trees are not appropriately planted in the spring, as I understand. Is that a correct, or not the best time, let's say?
Yeah, spring is the best time, fall is the second best time. By the time we would start now, it would be more summertime, so.
I misconstrued the statement. I meant to state it as you've said it, that by the time you were able to order the trees and get them planted, it would be later than the spring. So therefore, whatever would be spent, it seems to me that you perhaps the cutting it in half would be appropriate if that made more sense, and that probably would be directed toward later planning.
Okay. Mr. Mullen.
Yeah, I want to go back to what I stated before about trees. I like trees as much as anybody else, but there's a large number of staffing issues. We're holding back on staffing certain departments. The example that I'll use is the IT department. They've been waiting for 4 or 5 years now to have additional staffing to help them so that they can move forward and be more efficient. And we're looking at putting $75,000 back into trees. What I think that this is going to, the message personally that I think this is going to send to the staff is care more about trees than we do you. And I think that's a terrible message to be sending. I think we need to send a message that we support the staff, and they've put together a budget for us that is cut to the bone, and I don't see that we can really do a lot to make this thing move any better. And if we start putting things back in that are not directly impacting the staff to help the staff to do their jobs better, I think it's a negative impact on what we're doing for the city. I think it's going to be more of a negative than a positive.
Spalding?
Just a point of clarification, we're not putting money in the budget, we're just transferring funds, right?
Well, no, you're taking a number that was 0 and moving it up to 75,000.
Or we're taking it away from from the one-room schoolhouse.
Well, that hasn't been decided yet.
We will.
Someone's got to make a motion.
Well, and I don't know what these other numbers are going to look like on the wish list by the time we're done. And, Mr. Morley.
Well, as a follow-up to Alderman Stepaniak, I don't think we've identified if and where this money is coming from. All this is an increase in the current budget we're talking about. That's all.
Anyone else? Alderman Shea.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree with Alderman Mulliner. I think the staff was asked to make the hard decisions and cut $4 million, and I think we ought to stick with exactly what they've proposed.
Okay. Anyone else who hasn't spoken yet? Then I'll go to Mr. Nybo.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I'll make one comment. The one part of Alderman Moriarty's suggestion I do believe is something we should seriously consider. You know, there's a lot of stuff in this budget. I think the one thing that we will hear about when people find out about it is a $75 charge for block parties. I am already hearing about that, and I think that's something we should seriously think about adjusting. We're taking 96% out of the working cash fund this year. An extra $25,000 is there, and I think we should put it into the general fund to cover the offset of $25,000 of anticipated revenue that the city thinks they can take from block parties, which is a service that we've always provided without charging, and which is a service that we're going to incur no additional cost to provide this year. So I think we're potentially causing ourselves a host of troubles if we don't address this issue now, because it's going to be coming to us in the summer.
Alderman Gutenkopf, I don't think, spoke to this issue, and then Alderman Rose.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, I think that argument can be made for anything, but we're talking about trees. And I'm really torn on this one. Many of you know I worked at the Martin Arboretum for a long time, and I have a particular affinity for planting trees and for increasing urban forest and for all of the many benefits of the trees. But the reality is we've got a very austere budget, and Alderman Mulliner has a good point. We've asked for some serious cuts and some personnel and hiring freezes. So I think there are other programs that will more actively benefit residents, and if we're not looking at a major decrease in urban forest in Elmhurst this year, then maybe the tree planting budget needs to take a hiatus. I have a question for the staff, and that's that if we, what do you realistically think we'll be able to plant if we were to fund this year? Would we realistically be able to plant half of our typical budget in the fall, or a quarter, or 3/4?
Mr. Borchard.
Refer to Mr. Morley and Mr. Hughes. I know generally fall is second best, spring's the best. And in the fall, trees have been picked for the spring planting, so you've got less tree stock to pick from. So you got a lot of things going against you with the fall planting program. Mr. Hughes?
Yeah, we find that you have about half the species available to you in the fall that you would have in the spring. A little higher mortality rate. We used to do a spring planting and a fall planting, so it can be done, but you know, we more or less let the residents pick from a variety of species that we, you know, are good species that we want to see, but the list they would get in the fall is about half of that. And then right now, you know, we purchase our trees through the tree consortium, and those contracts have all been gone out, and so for us to go tag trees now, that we would get the leftovers.
I have a follow-up.
Yeah.
Well, it seems to me that we have a wonderfully good intention here of trying to preserve this program, but that our window of opportunity has really slipped past us. And I do know that we allow residents to plant trees in the parkway if they get a permit from the city, and I think that that's a program that hasn't been widely spread, that most people don't know that they can plant parkway trees if they get permission from the city, because we want to, of course, control the species that they're planting. So I think perhaps in this austere budget year, we do a little bit more to let people know that there's an option available to them, that there are places they can get trees. The Arbor Day Foundation gives out thousands and thousands of free trees every year. So there are other ways that we can encourage tree planting in Elmhurst, and perhaps not plant at a bad time with a bad selection of trees, and that we really consider next year as a year that we put 100% of this budget back in.
Okay, very good. Alderman Rose.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to think of this as a deferral, not that we're never going to plant trees in this town again. I mean, I think that's, we have to be clear that that's really what we're doing. I also actually spoke with the city manager earlier today around this same permitting issue, and that we do more publication of this as an option for folks. For example, if I want to honor my husband's birthday, I can plant a tree anywhere in the city. It doesn't have to be in my parkway, but I can go ahead and do that. And I think that's something we can do, let folks know that they can do this. I think it is aspirational. We aspire to do that. We can't force people to do that. But I do think that we might see people in this town stepping up to say, gee, I'm willing to do that. And I think, keep in mind, this is stopgap. We're talking about deferring this. We are not stopping our tree planting program altogether. But I just, in good conscience, would find it very difficult to really add this level into this budget without having, well, we're taking away from other things. And even this notion of taking it from the one-room schoolhouse, I don't think we have a clear idea about what kind of deterioration. We have a plan in mind about what we're going to do at that schoolhouse. We have no idea what level of deterioration might occur if we don't do that this year. So I have some difficulty with that. So I could not be in favor of adding this 150 or actually even this 75 into this at this point. But we do have these alternatives of encouraging people to think about this as a gifting process to the city.
I don't know who spoke last over here. I think Mr. Gao did, so I'll go to Alderman Lubnicki first and then Mr. Gao.
Thank you. A question for the city manager, and I might be wrong, I'm just looking at some past notes. Is there a grant coming to the one-room schoolhouse? Is that the $200,000 figure I wrote down?
Yes.
And that will be coming in the '09 budget?
Actually, two grants that add up to $200,000.
And if we do not make a contribution to that, let's say matching funds for funds, do we lose that grant? Or is that grant kind of just solid?
That's a solid grant.
So,
it can only be used for the one-room schoolhouse.
Okay, follow up then. Basically, we're talking about the difference of $180,000 to back out of the one-room schoolhouse budget, still doing the parking lot, which would give you $180,000 to still do your block parties, still plant half your trees, and even do your rear yard drains. So it's not stopping the one-room schoolhouse, but it is giving some money away from the one-room schoolhouse to to promote projects that were taken out of the budget, to let the people who are yet complaining about the block parties and the tree planting and the rear yard drain. And again, I'm not talking about pushing off the one-room schoolhouse for an infinite amount of time either. If this $200,000 grant will still keep the process going, I know there's a lot of structural work done in the infancy of this one-room schoolhouse that was already done, and I think to finish off the project and put that on hold and let these other projects follow through, if the grant is there and we won't lose it, you're only talking about taking enough out of this budget which could fund possibly these three other things we're talking about taking out of the budget.
Okay, very good. Mr. Gowan and Mr. Reed.
I was just, as the discussion has flown on the tree issue on having a budget, or rather putting 75,000 back in, it sounds like a good idea. It feels good, but in practice, in terms of what trees are available for fall planting, and it doesn't sound like the best use of money. So I guess I'm sort of Well, I think on further reflection that it probably is a good thought, but is not as good an idea in execution. I might also add a note that I wasn't really aware that one could seek permission to plant a tree in the front yard or a parkway. I once upon a time didn't ask permission. And the tree is still there.
Mr. Regan.
And it's starting to get redundant, I think, based on what Mr. Hughes has said. I mean, on this particular issue, which is great in concept, but poor in the execution, the ship has left the dock on this one for this year. So I think I would take a pass on this. As to how much money we could or couldn't use, I don't know what the dollars are in the next two items that Alderman Moriarty has. So great concept, I think problematic on the execution as to the tree issue.
Mr. Borchard?
Just from a, keep it making sense for the city manager perspective, I would comment that the use of the working cash fund remaining balance, which is about $27,000, to finance the anticipated revenue from a street closure to provide revenue for block parties, that works, and would allow for a modified block party program to go forward with free street closure permits being provided by the city, as the city has, as it's been stated, celebrated and supported for many, many years. That works. That's kind of like a balanced proposition from the city manager perspective, but I'm just advising you guys set the policy. From a past policy perspective, you have tried, the staff has tried to sort operational dollars and capital dollars. All of the dollars for the one-room schoolhouse are capital improvement dollars. The trees and the rear yard drain are operational dollars. So I point out that the manager's got a, we're crossing over where you've been very disciplined in the past. On the trees, I think the Morton Arboretum tradition and the city of Elmhurst tradition would say, plan for success as best you can. That's spring, plan for it, be in advance of it as the city has been in the past, and instruct the staff to double up the program for next spring, and we'll be right back on schedule. I would suggest that be the tree solution. The rear yard drain, I would appreciate the opportunity to provide rear yard drains in the past tradition of the city, particularly in a wet season, and a lot of folks on the list, and that I would suggest you, if you wish to do, just instruct the staff to take that out of authorized use of the fund balance.
Okay, well, we still have a motion from Alderman Moriarty.
Yeah, I just wanted to, the reason why I had brought these three items up, and I thought with the viability of discussing, is because these are the three items that really directly affect the residents of Elmhurst. They talk about the trees, they talk about how much water they've had in their backyard or their basements or the standing water around. And these are simple solutions that we can assist with the residents through these difficult economic times, as well as the block party. The block party is one of the strong elements that bring the blocks together and forms our community even more stronger than ever. So if we could find it in our budget to put these three items or even some portion of the tree planting back into the budget, I think all the residents would really, truly appreciate it.
Okay, the chair sees that there's a motion before us to reestablish $75,000 as a tree planting number. Mr. Regan, you got something?
Yeah, just on the trees. Going back, if I made Mr. Borchard's idea, why don't you just instruct the staff to double up next spring? Query, if we were to do that, where are you going to get the money? Isn't it the same budget?
Would be financed out of the next fiscal year budget, which is the next city council's responsibility to.
It would be the same thing as we're doing now.
Right.
They'd be looking forward into the next budget year, but it's this spring.
Be direction to the city budget officer, the city staff, to next year's budget, double up and figure out how to pay for it. And we'll be working back and forth with the staff and the council as to is there new revenues, or are we working with existing revenues? And if existing revenues, then something's gonna have to go to provide for the double up.
All right, thank you.
All right, I think the chair would like to call the roll on the motion before us.
Okay. Lomnicki,
Aye.
Moriarty,
Aye.
Regan,
No.
Gutenkopf,
No.
Leader,
No.
Shea,
No.
Graham,
No.
Rose,
No.
Gow,
No.
Hipskin,
No.
Sapaniak,
No.
Morley,
No.
Mulliner.
No.
Looks like 11, 2 ayes and 11 nays.
2 ayes and 11 nays, that motion fails. Okay, the chair would,
Excuse me.
Point of order. I think we
Did I
missed
leave
one,
someone
missed.
out?
Vance doesn't have it.
oh, Mr. Nybo, who wasn't in the roll.
Kind of takes the suspense out of it now.
I'm so sorry.
Get a weighted vote.
Ivo.
No.
Okay.
So that's 12, 2
It's 2
ayes
ayes
and 12
and
nays.
12 nays, okay. Very good, and that's an understandable error on the part of the clerk, since Mr. Nybo arrived a little later, and maybe the chair should have announced that Mr. Nybo had arrived, so that she would have. Sometimes chairs do that, I don't normally do that, so people are coming and going. I have a few things I wanted to add to that discussion, but I'm sitting behind the gavel, and I'm supposed to kind of stay out of it as much as I can. Let me share my thoughts with you. First of all, it's a good thought. It would be nice to be able to do this. We all want to do this. I sat here, whatever it was now, 4 weeks ago, and bemoaned the fact that we might lose our Tree City designation, and that I didn't want to be the mayor the year that we lost the Tree City designation. Well, Mr. Borchard informed me the next morning that, in fact, we would not lose our tree. There's a lot of things you have to do. You know, you get points for doing things. One of which, you get the big one is that you have a forestry department within your city. We do. That forestry department has X number of individuals staffed in it full time. We do. That you do tree trimming and proactively attack diseases before they kill. We do all kinds of stuff. So we're not going to lose our Tree City thing, our Tree City designation. That's my first point. My second point is that, like many things, we defer. We've been deferring purchasing vehicles. Some of those vehicles will help our public works people do their job better. Some of those vehicles are what the police are out riding around in all day. Some of those vehicles might be public safety vehicles attached to the fire department, by way of example. So we're deferring things, and someone made the point that this is deferring. It's not ending, it's not stopping, it's more like deferring. I made the point, and I believe it reached one of the newspapers one way or another, that we could defer this for a year, and in the big picture, I don't know how many trees there are in Elmhurst, but the number is thousands upon thousands of trees, and we could put off 400 trees for a year. I don't think people, if you have the spot in front of your house that's waiting for a tree, you're going to notice, yes. But generally speaking, around the town, it's not going to be something you notice. If this goes on for 5 or 6 years, maybe then we'd get to a point where this is going to be something. To Alderman Mulliner's point, I agree with the thing that we're dealing with our employees. Everyone, the press is writing feverishly, people are looking in on the television. We're trying to maintain the services that we're giving to the city. We do that with people who drive the public works departments, people who are behind the wheel of a squad car 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. We are talking to these folks about their labor rates. We're trying to negotiate, what's the proper way I want to say this? We're trying to negotiate them to understand that what we've been able to do for them in the past, we're not going to be able to do for them in the future. And that's a tough thing, because we've taken a lot of pride in trying to take care of the people who take care of us and our neighborhoods in our city. But it's a tough time, and I think that the point that, and I wouldn't have picked the IT department as Mr. Mulliner did, but he's an IT guy. I'm going to hang my hat more on the police and the fire department. That we, those are the critical things that need to be maintained. On the subject of the Run-Room Schoolhouse, I think that we got a little bit of an education there. Yes, the number was over $300,000. 180 of it is a grant. 150 of it is a grant. That leaves about 180 to go. Is that right, Marilyn? You're looking at me? No, 200,000. to go.
Grant.
Okay. And the amount in the budget to spend beyond the grant dollars was what?
That was about 240,000.
Okay.
That all CIP funded.
So 240 and 200 were 440. That was the original number. Here's my point. Let me try to make my point. My point is that those aren't the only dollars that we spent on the one-room schoolhouse. We acquired this structure now over a decade ago, nearly a decade ago, approximately a decade ago, and there's been a lot of funds put into this facility over time. And it would kind of like be, you know, I'm trying to think of an analogy here that makes some sense. It would be like Boeing ordering up an aircraft. Think of what a 747 costs, but then deciding that they can't afford the interior. Well, without the interior, it doesn't work. And it's the last little close the gap part. So the closer we get to closing the gap, I want to say sillier, this is the word that comes to my mind, there must be a better term than this, the more unfortunate it is that we can't close the gap. We have a chance to close this gap, get this done, get this very important historical system back online for Elmhurst and for the surrounding communities and the county. We've promised we're going to get this work done. It's time to get this work done. And to leave it not done, to close the gap, the last little bridge to complete, I would advise would be an error. And besides that, as has been pointed out, those are capital funds. These are all operating budgets. Mr. Borchert has kind of shown us the way here of what we can do. So I would look to the council for motions as they might please. Alderman Moriarty?
I'd like to make another motion. I'd like to make a motion to eliminate the block party fee.
Eliminate the block party fee, which takes away a revenue stream more than deletes a cost, right, Mr. Borchert? Am I right about that? Just as I'm helping phrase it. Who would like to second that? Mr. Nybo? Second.
Point of clarification?
Yes, sir.
Was that a motion to eliminate the block party fee while authorizing an additional $25,000 transfer from the working cash fund?
No, not at all, because this is just additional revenue coming in. So it's not like we are eliminating any additional funds from the budget.
We're not eliminating anything on the expenditure side, but we are walking away from a proposed revenue stream that was proposed to be how much, just so everybody understands, what was that line item? I'm sorry?
About $25,000.
About $25,000.
I won't second that motion.
Okay, we need a second. Alderman Lubnicki. All right. Alderman Moriarty, do you want to speak to that?
With this proposed elimination of the block party fee, I have received several phone calls from several residents who are very upset that they are going to have to pay a $75 fee to conduct a block party. They're even more upset that we haven't even approved the budget and the registration fee to charge the block parties are already online. So this item hasn't even been approved yet, and we already have the form online that they can apply for and be charged for the $75. This block party, the fee, I think deters, well, it's like we're in economic times. What we want to do is produce and create more of a community's atmosphere. Block parties create atmospheres for the neighbors. They get out into the street, they get to talk, they get to have conversations with each other. That is something that we should always encourage the city of Elmhurst, and there should not be a cost for them to be gathering with one another.
Okay, any other discussion? Alderman Lubnicki.
Thank you. I also agree that, and not to any fault of ours, but, we no longer are going to have, Elmfest in the format that Elmfest is used to having. And I think accessing a fee to this, and I don't think at this point in time $25,000 is going to make or break this budget. And if we can implement one thing in good faith to at least keep the citizens of this town knowing that we're not going to try to take everything away. And also in the front porch that just came out a couple weeks ago, it already had said that there was going to be a fee. And some people misconstrued that as almost that there wasn't going to be block parties at all. The way the wording was on the front porch, it made it sound like there were going to be no block parties at all, when yet we were going to charge a fee. So I think we were a little bit too jumping the gun, let's say, on all of this before it all had passed through this budget. So I would appreciate that also being put back in. Is the no charge.
Okay. Alderman Rose.
I actually have heard from a number of people about this as well, but I will say I don't think it makes any sense to cut out a revenue stream without saying where we're going to get this money from. I mean, I think to pull it from the working cash fund makes sense to me. The only way I would support this if we said we're going to take, we will quit charging for that, but we've got to add this money in. So I think it's actually prudent, you know, this is about balancing. It's prudent if we're going to do that to actually find the money somewhere. I think we've got it in the working cash fund. And do I need to make that motion?
If you are making, if you want that to happen, you need to make that motion, yes.
I so move.
Okay, I need a second on that. Mr. Nybel seconds.
If I can continue on with that,
Please.
I also would like to say, I don't think it's prudent of the city staff to actually at least anticipate that both online and in publications, because people start planning these block parties right away. If for some reason we choose to do it this way, and they've got that, we can always refund money to people, but it's a lot harder to say, you're not going to charge anything for a block party, and oh, by the way, yeah, we are. So I think it was prudent of them to do that. I don't know that I think that's anticipatory. So that's what I think, is that we should pull it from the working cash fund.
Okay, Alderman Morley?
I do have a question for the city manager or someone who might know this. And I appreciate what the city staff has done to find $4 million in this budget. I mean, there's places where you've cut, you know, $100,000 here or there and no one said a word. So you're never really going to know what might push a button. I have to reiterate what everyone else has said up here. I am surprised by the amount of phone calls and emails I got as a result of this block party fee. And I support Alderman Rose's suggestion by virtue of the fact that she also found a way to fund it as well. I do have a question. How many permits have actually been applied for at this point?
We know there's several hundred that get processed. Mr. Hughes says about a dozen maybe have gone through the process.
Okay, that's the answer.
Okay.
Mr. Morley?
I would anticipate more are coming because a lot of the phone calls and inquiries I got were, I can't believe I got this permit fee. Is this right? Can you check on it? And I actually spoke to the city manager about it. So
Okay.
I'll support this.
Okay, Alderman Gutenkopf.
Thank you. I guess I have a couple of questions. And my first one is that this proposed $75 fee, does it generate income above and beyond what it costs us to set up for the block parties?
No, as identified, it was a staff suggestion that to allow the block parties to go forward without the ability to finance that if there was a service fee associated with the street closure, we could maintain certainly block parties that needed a street closure, and the couple of hundred to 250 to whatever streets that wanted a street closure would pay for that cost, and the other 150 miles of streets that didn't have a block party wouldn't be paying for one. Although it's been our tradition to finance block parties and closures as a community event. So, answer your question, the $75 fees was just to cover the cost of the anticipated loss of barricades that occurs during a season of block parties, and the delivery of 4 to every closure and the pickup of those 4 at the end of the weekend. So it's the minimum of coverage of expenses. There's not a revenue associated with it.
Does that fee include street sweeping, or are we still proposing to eliminate street sweeping before the block parties?
It does not include a street sweeping fee. So street sweeping is at the present not a deluxe service with a block party. We were going to do a minimum of a street closure, allow folks to have their block party in the street, but not do the extra of a special street cleaning and an extra of a special mosquito spray for the block party.
And then my final question is, if we dip into the fund to pay for this, that wipes it out. And our final point that Alderman Moriarty wanted to address tonight was rear yard drain program. And admit that I have heard from many more residents about the rear yard drain program than I have heard about block parties. And as much as I think block parties are a wonderful opportunity for residents of a neighborhood to get out of their house and get to know each other and to, spend some time together creating community, my fear is that we're asking all the residents to pay for the 200 streets, and that more people will directly benefit from the rear yard drain program, which we are not yet talking about. But I have to throw it into this mix because the funding that we're looking at for the block parties is the potential funding that we're looking at for the rear yard drain program. So I have much less problem asking the people who want to have this particular service pay for it. I just want to make sure that the fees we're charging are directly offsetting the costs that we're incurring.
Okay, Alderman Nabel.
Just a procedural question. We're voting on a secondary motion to amend a primary motion, right?
Subsidiary to a
Subsidiary
primary.
motion.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
That's what's before us now. Any other discussion on that issue? Okay, seeing none, I'd ask the clerk to please call the roll on the motion before us, which is to find the $25,000 in the, to, what's the word, not find, to go to the working cash fund to find the $25,000, okay?
Rose.
That's the gist of it.
Nybo.
Aye.
Regan. Looks like he's absent. Gutenkopf.
No.
Leader.
Aye.
Shea.
No.
Graham.
No.
Gow.
No.
Ipskin.
Absent.
Ipskin is absent.
Okay, absent. Moriarty.
No.
Sapaniak.
No.
Morley.
Aye.
Lumnicki. Aye. Mulliner.
No.
All right, let's see here. Kind of got a little confused, but okay, I think I've got it here. All right. 5 ayes, 7 nays, and 2 absent.
5 ayes, 7 nays, 2 absent. That motion fails. Now, we do not have the city attorney here, but just in case anybody asks, the rule of 7 does not come into play on the negative side. Correct, Mr. Spiroff? There were 5 yeses, 7 noes, 2 absents. Okay, but for a different reason. Okay, thank you. All right, so the motion fails. So we're back to the main motion, which is to eliminate the revenue line in the budget, which calls for, to simplify this, a $75 fee on block parties, which was anticipated to raise $25,000 in revenue. That's the motion before us now. Does anybody wish to comment any further? Alderman Rose?
Yes, I think this budget process requires a certain amount of discipline, and if we can't find the money to support it, then I think it makes no sense to pull revenue out of there if we can't find the money to replace it, so I will not support this.
Okay, Alderman Moriarty?
It's only $25,000. I think that we don't need to be pulling $25,000 out of the working capital fund. I think we will have other avenues that will, support this small dollar amount of $25,000 in here, that we don't specifically need to transfer it from the working capital at this point in time.
Okay, any other discussion? See,
Point of
Ms.
order.
Morley.
Who seconded the motion?
It was
Leave
Alderman
Alderman,
Moriarty and Nybo second.
No, Nybo did not.
Nicky
did not.
Please,
Oh, okay.
question was who seconded the motion? I believe that that motion was made by Alderman Moriarty and seconded by Alderman Lomnicki, no?
Correct.
Okay, that's who it was.
I stand corrected.
Yes?
Follow-up?
Yes?
Is there any issue to the fact that the person who seconded the motion is not here?
Huh?
She left. She had to go home.
Well, let me remind you of something I said a couple of weeks ago. A quorum is presumed to exist until it is recognized to not exist. We get to the point where a quorum doesn't exist. First of all, 3 people have left the dais tonight without announcing to me that they were leaving, which is wrong. They should let me know. Please, don't leave the dais anymore without announcing to me that you're leaving so that we can protect our quorum. A quorum is presumed to exist until it is recognized that it doesn't. But I'm backtracking here, trying to find a time to see if I know the answer to this. That is a very obscure point of parliamentary information, and I don't know off the top of my head. I'm going to ask Mr. Spiroff, who is the Assistant City Attorney, and the city attorneys, as you know, act as our parliamentarians. And I have an answer, I've formulated an answer in my head, but I'm interested in yours. And you're going to need to go to a microphone. We're on TV. The issue is that the person who seconded the motion has left the meeting. Is that a problem?
I would say no, unless there is any request or any interest in an amendment to the motion, which she, of course, would have to...
Well, amending by consent of the motioner and the seconder.
Right, correct. The fact that it's the person making the second to the motion is no longer present, I think, is irrelevant to the council's proceedings at this point.
It's no longer relevant to the council's proceeding at this point. That's a good enough answer for me. So the answer to your question is no. Yes, sir.
So even though the person who seconded it is not here, the motion is still considered to be seconded?
Yes.
All right. That
Yes.
answers my question.
That's the ruling from the city attorney who has the function to do that. Remember, at the end of the day, the motion and the second is an instrument designed to, as all of parliamentary procedure is, to lend order to your meeting, to make sure that someone wants to discuss the item enough to put it before the board, and that that item has some, at least minimal level of support, i.e. a second. That's all it's for. So, okay? Yes.
If I can just add another little insight onto this block party. Not by, I mean, we have still a fund balance, so by not transferring...
Wait a minute, please, time out, excuse me.
Yes.
My fault, you're back on.
Thank
Okay.
you. What I was going to say, what I want to iterate is that we don't need to specifically transfer a certain $25,000 from the working cash fund. We can just leave it and spend down $25,000 out of our general fund, and that's my point here.
All other things being equal, that is exactly what happens. All other things are never equal, but all other things being equal, that's what will happen.
Thank you.
All right, any further discussion? Seeing none, I'd ask the clerk to please call the roll on the main motion before us.
Moriarty.
Aye.
Lomnicki, absent. Regan, absent. Gutenkopf.
Nay.
Leader.
Nay.
Shea.
No.
Graham.
No.
Rose.
No.
Gow.
No.
Hipskin, absent. Nybo.
Yes.
Sapaniak.
Aye.
Morley.
Aye.
Mulliner.
No.
Four ayes, 7 nays, and, let's see,
3 absent.
3 absent. That's
Okay,
correct.
4 ayes, 7 nays, that motion fails. Okay? Any other motions we'd like to make this evening relative to the budget? Mr. Nebo.
Point of information, so it's a no vote on the motion to amend that could now move to reconsider that vote. Am I correct about that?
I think that sounds right. Because it was the prevailing side.
So we've got to have a no vote on the primary motion? I mean,
We had a no vote. If you want to reconsider the primary motion, I think anyone who voted no can do that. Hold on.
I thought it had to be a majority.
Yeah, must be moved by one who's on the prevailing side. The word prevailing is in there, not positive, not yes, but prevailing side. Mr. Spiroff?
And to add to that, the council's local rules require that the person seconding any motion to reconsider as well have voted on the prevailing side. That is
Yes,
a
right.
change to
I
Robert's
understand.
rules.
I knew that, right. Not only the motion. So, did you want to move to reconsider?
I don't think I can because I was a yes vote on the primary, right?
So you're just pointing out a Robert's Rule of Order issue for us this evening?
Maybe somebody who voted no can kind of see that if they craft the motion in a certain way, that there might be enough people to support it. So my personal opinion is that waiving the block party fee and authorizing the transfer.
You're
of the working
debating an issue
change.
not before us at this point. Thank you. Okay. Well, Mr. Borchard has made a suggestion about the rear yard, which was what, Mr. Borchard?
Well, I think if there's a will of the majority for the rear yard drain program to go forward, that could, as the last item, could be funded from the fund balance. But
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Alderman Moriarty.
Then I make a motion that the rear yard program, drain program, be reinstated into our budget.
And are you included in funding received from the fund
That is
balance, did you say,
correct.
Mr. Borchard? General fund
General fund
balance.
balance.
Okay, fine. Alderman Gutenkauf, did you desire to second that?
Yes.
Okay. Discussion on that, I'll go to the motion maker as always, Alderman Moriarty.
As I say, this is a very, very important issue that we need to reinstate into the budget, especially with how much rain we have received in the last 6 months. There is a considerable amount of standing water in a lot of the neighbors' backyards, and if this will help them alleviate that problem, we need to definitely reinstate this into the budget.
Okay, Alderman Gutenkauf.
All I want to add is that the predictions I've heard for the rest of the year are that we'll have more rainfall than normal, and I think that we need to be proactive about this. I keep hearing from people about yard drainage programs, and anything we can do to help them helps the entire city.
Okay. Mr. Borchard, can I ask a point of information for everybody on the dais, and I'm not asking this with any prejudice towards either side here. What is the dollar amount we're talking about, or what would have been, what was in the budget last year? I don't have the book open to the right page.
Last year was 75, and we got 50 for this year.
75 and
last
50 for this year?
50 proposed for this year. So
And
we're
then,
down
but the 50
25.
is out.
But I would suggest 75 go in if you're gonna,
If you're gonna do it, recognize what it probably is gonna be.
we've got a lot.
And that's a 50,
Yeah, the 50 has to be in because people will still go forward. The difference over previous years is the city no longer contributes. The city no longer contributes $1,000. So rear drains, absent $1,000, would still be going forward. The city is still running the program. There's no sort of city participation dollar-wise, so we'll still do the engineering. We've hired a contractor.
so what's really at stake here is $50,000.
Right, because we have to pay him. So if he's doing the work, we would pay him, and then we would get the money from the homeowner.
Okay.
Less, no $1,000 contribution.
Okay, Mr. Gao, you looked, and then I'll go to Mr. Brand.
Well, I just think that it's, in light of the problems that have come to our committee from several segments of the city, and if that prediction is anywhere close to being true, I mean, this is a solution we've had in our arsenal every year. This is something we've encouraged, and I wouldn't want to lose it at this point.
Mr. Brand.
Yes, thank you. I want to, I guess, reiterate a little bit what just Alderman Gao just said. I think we had a lot of tough decisions, and there were some good suggestions on bringing some of our programs back, being tree planting and block parties. In my eyes, you know, the rear yard drain program, especially in light of everything that's been happening, is essential. So I'd really hate to see that go. So I'm all for reinstating this program.
Alderman Shea, did you have your hand up? Alderman Shea.
Yeah, this is really what I consider more of a necessity, especially after having quite a few people from Pine Street sitting in our committee meeting tonight. They really need the relief.
Alderman Rose.
I just have one question. Where will we get the additional revenue?
Well, in this case, if it's approved, the modest contribution to the general fund balance would be less of a modest balance, or might actually be a modest drawdown of the fund balance, but the fund balance does contemplate nearly $8 million, so we'd be short 25,000 from that fund balance.
Spanier?
Thank you, Mayor. This is extremely important because this protects a person's property, and property here is absolutely valuable in their homestead. And the concern I have, and I think I'm going to ask it before the end of the evening, I don't want to jump ahead, is related to the water issues, and we have a lot of them, and this is one step to alleviate that. The other one is, in our budget going forward, will it necessitate any money to basically support those 1,200 homes in Elmhurst who may wind up back in the floodplain, to make sure that we fight that one right down the line? And if it requires funds, we have to think about that. Perhaps it's in here, perhaps it doesn't. Maybe it's just the overhead of staff time. But the important thing is property and water is an issue in this town every year on a regular basis, and we have to address it.
Mr. Borcher, did you want to answer I can answer Mr. Spaniak's question as well, but why don't you go ahead?
The answer to Alderman Stepaniak's question is the dollars to do what Alderman Stepaniak is concerned about are in the budget.
Thank you.
To address the floodplain issue?
Yes.
That's a consultant on the berm.
Certified.
But is a repair of the berm or raising the berm in there at this point? It's not, is it?
No.
That's the worst case scenario.
Right.
That's what I was going to say. In the worst case scenario, the new flood maps out of DuPage County show Salt Creek rising to within 3 feet of the top of the current levee. Once it's closer than 3 feet, there's no longer 3 feet of what they call freeboard, which is the height of the water, the 100-year flood to the top of the levee. That's the freeboard. If that is less than 3 feet, that levee is considered to not exist for purposes of drawing floodplain maps. That's what instantaneously puts 1,100 houses back in the floodplain. I would suggest to you that Mr. Borchard has a plan and a budget already to make sure that our levee, as it exists today, is doing what it's supposed to do. It's still stable. It hasn't settled. It doesn't have rodent infestation in it, which can affect a levee. It doesn't have a footpath or a bike trail across the top of it, which at one point can wear it down 5 or 6 or 8 inches, and then you've got a problem when you have the water. And some citizen would rightfully ask later on, well, why weren't you paying attention? You put this thing in place, and then you forgot about it. No, we haven't forgot about it, and we're going to go out in the next year and check all of those things, make sure that the levee is fine. I will suggest to you and to the council that in the future, if it should come to the fact that, A, the levee is in fine shape as is, but it is no longer 3 feet above the 100-year floodplain at some point in town, and therefore it goes away, that then becomes an issue very similar to what the council faced in 1989 and 90 and 91, and that you and I have spent the better part of 2 decades working on, which was to fix that problem. And it would take that kind of heavy lifting again. It's not just a number in the budget. I mean, that's a political will to find a revenue source to raise the money to build those berms up to where they need to be. And given that big a problem for that many people and that large a neighborhood, I don't think that it would be any problem raising the political muster and will to get that done. So, where are we at here? We have a motion in front of us right now. Mr. Morley.
Another question for the city manager. I know that when we were considering putting the rear yard drain program funding on hiatus, not the program itself, but the funding, that we received a memo in the last month or so saying that people would basically line up in queue. And if the funding came back, we would fund it in that order. Do we have people in queue right now, and how many is that?
Yeah, we have quite a number that we have to go out and do an inspection and do an estimate and give it to them. And basically, our program is that when they pay 50%, they get in the line. So if someone says, I can't afford it now, and they have their estimate, and then at some point in the future, the $1,000 contribution came back in, they might at that point say, okay, now I can, it's worth it, and they would just pay their half less the 1,000, and they would go into place. So it's a matter of doing estimates and then receiving a down payment.
So how many do we have? Do we know?
We probably have 50 outstanding requests. We go out and visit, we do estimates. I don't have a feel for how many we'll the bad years we get more, the dry years we don't get many, so we'll get a lot.
Okay. All right, Alderman Rose.
I just think this is critical to support this. I mean, I understand the money aspect, but I've heard from numerous people who've spent $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 already on this, so I think it's important if we have a revenue source to support it, I would absolutely support it.
All right. Very good. We have a motion before us. I'd ask the clerk to please call the roll.
Moriarty.
Aye.
Gutenkopf.
Aye.
Regan, absent. Leader.
Aye.
Shea.
Aye.
Ram.
Aye.
Rose.
Aye.
Gow.
Aye.
Hipskin, absent. Nybo.
Aye.
Sapaniak.
Aye.
Morley.
Aye.
Lomnicki, absent. Mulliner.
Aye.
11 ayes, 0 nays, 3 absent.
11 ayes, 0 nays. That motion carries. Okay, very good. Anything else? Okay, seeing none, the chair will wrap up by saying you heard Mr. Borch's explanation of what are the next steps, where we go from here. We would expect to see this on the April 6th agenda. I want to say, listen, this has been tough. I hope folks watching in or the folks who read the newspaper articles about this get a feel for how difficult some of these things are. It's not easy. We're trying to, stretch a dollar as long as we can. We have many different constituencies we need to serve. I think you did, as a group, a fantastic job this evening. Let me just leave it at that. With that, I need a motion to adjourn. Alderman Rose seconds. Alderman Rose moves. Alderman Moriarty seconds. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Hearing none, that motion carries.